record. Probably you'll get a notice about it. So let me say welcome once again. And our facilitator today is Sharda Naidu, who many of you know anyway. She's current IAF treasurer globally and a leading light in the Africa region. And her background is really working in economic development, tackling economic inequality, financial inclusion, business development and gender, and a few other things, I'm sure. So over to you, Sharda.
Great, thank you, John, and thank you all. I mean, this is just, it's really great to get so much interest. I really appreciate it. And after what we've been through in South Africa, you know, you kind of go inside. And so when you have a chance to share and hear from other people and exchange, it's really great. I'm going to go into screen share. Let me start at the beginning. And so the title is, it's kind of really challenging, but I think the situation is also really challenging. You know, what can facilitation do, or what facilitation can do in the most unequal country in the world? When we achieved democracy in South Africa in 1994, we were the most unequal country in the world. And as I was preparing for this, I found that we're still the most unequal country in the world. We're at the top of the top 3 countries, including Zambia, and I can't remember what the third country is that in the top 3 of the highest levels of inequality in the world. So I think the world saw what was happening in South Africa, but it's still upsetting and traumatizing to see some of the scenes. I mentioned to John earlier that after the first, probably by day 3, I couldn't look. I couldn't watch the news anymore. It was, you know, these were places I know, places close to where I'd lived, and it really, and I, you know, I think also that what happened was, it was kind of a nightmare of a lot of people in the run-up to 1994. But you know, after 1994, I don't think anybody imagined that something like this could actually happen in the country, and this at the scale at which it happened. So it was pretty horrific. And this morning, I received a message from someone in a group, or a South African group of which I'm a part. And the question that was put into this group was, people are getting organized, that if something like this has to happen again, you know, how organized, and if it gets worse, you know, are there going to be safe houses, safe places, etc. And so I guess it's more constructive. My thinking, I spoke to someone, a family member, soon after. They had a family business that they've owned for more than 50 years, and the business wasn't actually burnt itself, but a business next to it was burnt. So ovens and things that they've had in their family bakery for more than 45 years were actually kind of mangled in the heat of the fire in the business next door. And I said, you know, I think businesses in Durban, and certainly, you know, in other parts of the country, businesses need to start taking the opposite of what's expected. That instead of you know, going into a kind of siege mentality and overprotecting, say, you know what, we understand what's going on there, and we're going to get involved in creating employment, in, you know, fighting for technical education and those sorts of things, because those are the things I believe are going to make the difference. Anyway, to just go into the kinds of things I'm going to go into, a little bit of a perspective on inequality in South Africa. The role of the state is split across 3 levels of government in South Africa. I'm not going to go into that in any detail in this, but just for you to know that. I'm going to look a little bit at local government roles, at the policy-making role in local government, at local economic development, at integrated development plans, and public participation, which is probably something that's of greater interest to this group. The state of local government, which is relevant to what happened in South Africa. And then I quote from an article that was called A City in Pieces, just to get, for you to get a sense of, you know, how one journalist feels about a city in which she has grown up and she still lives. So some facets of inequality in South Africa. The Gini coefficient is a measure that economists use to measure levels of inequality. If a country has a 0 Gini coefficient, then there's perfectly equal distribution of wealth. So, you know, the higher the ratio, the closer you are to equal distribution. If there's a Gini coefficient of 1, it means one person owns everything. And so the fact that South Africa had a Gini coefficient of 0.67 in 2006, then it dropped to 0.65 in 2015, which says that, you know, some progress was made. And then it's expected to be 0.63 in 2021. So if you think about the period from 1994 up to 2021, very little has changed in South Africa in terms of reducing the levels of inequality in the country. And I want to just mention that, you know, even when you grow up in a country and you know how bad it is, and you feel that anger when you experience acts of discrimination, as it were, you know, like my mother once just sitting down in a restaurant, like she didn't go and expect to be served in the restaurant. She knew very well she wasn't allowed to, but we had ordered takeaways and she just sat down, you know, and then the white woman who owns it sends somebody else to say to her, go and tell her she can't sit there. And, you know, but, you know, that surge of anger is something that you know, you grow up with. And anyway, so, you know, and I'm sure all of us have felt it with some measure of discrimination or an act of racism or sexism that we've experienced. There's another ratio, which is a new one on me, which measures the extent of spending across different groups in the population. And this one is very telling because it says the top 10% of the population, or the wealthiest 10%, spend 8.6 times more than the bottom 40% in South Africa in 2006. And that the ratio reduced, again, not very significantly, to 7.9 in 2015. South Africa's labor market is still very heavily racialized and gender biased. The largest contributor to overall economic inequality is in the labor market, which is at 34.2%. So that will just give you some idea. The fact that women workers still earn 30% less on average, and a very telling statistic is that mean real earnings between 2011 and 2015 across different race groups. And this, by the way, was a decision that was taken in the early years of thinking through how will we know whether we are succeeding in reducing inequality and bringing more people into the formal economy. So mean real earnings amongst employed Black Africans was 6,899 Rand per month, right? Between those years. For people of mixed race and people of Indian and Asian origin, it was between, it was 9,399 respectively for mixed race people, and then 14,000 just per month for people of Indian or Asian origin. And for white people, 24,646 per month. So you can see 4 times as much for white income. And this is now, for quite a few years after the end of apartheid. So the entrenched, how entrenched inequality is. I'm just quickly showing you the provinces in the country because I'm going to talk about, the extent of inequality in provinces. And I want to point out the Eastern Cape down at the bottom on my right-hand side. I don't know whether from your side where it is. The Eastern Cape and then the Western Cape alongside it, and where's Mpumalanga. Gauteng is where Johannesburg is, and that's the industrial heartland of the country. The more developed areas of the country are in, and when I say developed, I mean industrially and in terms of infrastructure, etc., is Gauteng, which is where Johannesburg is, the Western Cape and KwaZulu. The Free State, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and Northwest are, although a lot more infrastructure development has taken place, they're more rural, more agricultural provinces. So, highest levels of inequality in 2015, with the Western Cape and Mpumalanga coming in second. The bottom 60% of households, now there's 16.1 million households, yeah? The bottom 60%, that's 9.66 million of households, depend more on social grants and less on income from the labor market. But also, that's the population group where hunger is very high, yeah? There's a Professor Ranchard at the University of Cape Town who has been tracking inequality and studying inequality for the last 25 years. And he says the prime cause are the high levels of unemployment. And I want to point out, and maybe for most of you, because many of you are from this continent, that, when you're unemployed in a developing country, you're unemployed. Unless you have family support, you don't have, the dole or many forms of social support. And in South Africa, even though there is a social grant system, the levels of social grants are really very small. And so when unemployment exacerbates it, it's Black people and women that are most adversely affected. And the numbers that I put in here are the current unemployment figures for South Africa. So Stats SA says 32.6% of people are unemployed. And then there's this expanded definition. This expanded definition of unemployment are the numbers of people that it's what's added on to the 32% is the numbers of people who are discouraged and who have stopped looking for work. And the thing that I always point out when we come to that expanded definition is, yes, there's a condition that some economists call the unemployment blues. Because when you're in a place with very high unemployment, how many times can you go out and ask or look for work and be told, or apply for jobs and be told, no, we don't have a job for you? So that's the one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that there's costs to going out and looking for work. Because if you have to go from A to B, someone has to give you the transport costs. And that someone or somebody else in the household probably has to give you, feed you and house you as well. So, the costs of going out and looking for work, or, if you have to put a CV together and you don't have a computer and you have to photocopy it and take it or send it or have access to the internet, all those things need resources. So, it's part of the complexity. In South Africa, 46.3% of young people, this is young people between the ages of 15 and 34, which means that 1 out of 2 young people in South Africa, and this is the expression I use, and I know that it's pretty accurate, is that 1 out of 2 young people in this country wake up to a vacuum. And, when you think about us having serious drug problems and those sorts of things, it becomes very understanding when young people wake up with nowhere to go and nothing to do. Then there are other ways in which inequality manifests. Gender inequalities, there's the inequality between urban and rural dwellers, access to a whole range of resources, differences in prices in between rural and urban areas. And then there's a word I can't see here. Let me just do this. Oh, urban and rural dweller inequalities, educational inequalities, which is a major factor, and racial inequalities. This is a quote, which was on the 21st of May, made by the same Professor Ranshot. And what he says is, short of massively disruptive social change in the form of revolutions, what we need is a policy system that thinks systematically and substantially. And I would say not just systematically, but systemically. Because what we find in the country is there isn't at the political level a real commitment or understanding of what is going to bring about systemic change when you've got this kind of massive poverty and inequality. Another area of just exposing the extent of poverty and inequality in the country is this is data of people who are inadequately housed in the country. So informal shacks, not in backyards, but in an informal or squatter settlement or on a farm, 8.2% or 1.3 million households. Traditional, which might be quite secure housing, nearly 900,000. Informal dwellings and shacks in backyards. And Alexandra Township, which is really not very far from where I live, it's like there's not even any pavement space left in Alex because of the extent of shacks which have come up. Unemployment in informal settlements is up to 80%. I've worked in fact, Kubeshni and I many years ago were both involved in a housing project on the East Rand, where that was involved with enabling people to move out of informal settlements into formal, or at the time, RDP housing. And one of the things I found walking around the informal settlements was very few of the shacks were unoccupied during working hours. In the majority of them, there were people there in the daytime. And it's the same in the townships when I've worked in what used to be Black townships during apartheid years. So the policy context is that there's the Freedom Charter, which promises houses security and comfort, and the Constitution, which has a Bill of Rights, which says that everybody has a right to have acceptable and adequate housing, jobs, and security. However, economic development policy, now one of the things, even though, like you'll see later, I talk about the Socioeconomic Rights Institute, that economics, I've got a quote somewhere, I think it's from Khrushchev, who said, economics is a science that does not please the human being, because it's although it's not that difficult to bring about a sound economic circumstance in a country, it's really about policy commitment and policy implementation and holding people to account. So there's an emphasis on wholesaling programs from national agencies. However, there's a lack of a system for training and accrediting trainers. And in a country like this, which has a huge skills problem, and you'll still hear lots of people blaming things on apartheid. And up to a point, that's true. You can blame it on apartheid because it restricted Black people from even working as skilled employees. The Black African people were only allowed to go into certain professions and certain jobs. They could not actually become artisans. They were forced to be laborers. And this was a very restrictive condition. And also, one of the early studies that I did was look at the restrictions on Black businesses and where Black people were allowed to set up businesses in township. Those were actually prescribed in terms of the types of businesses and the sizes of the businesses. But that's no excuse for 26 years later not having a really good and thorough technical training system, because we have the resources to do that. Yeah, and I just want to mention that on the weekend, my brother mentioned how during the rioting, especially in KZN, schools and technical colleges were destroyed. And he reminded me how in 1976, when the spiritual organization that my father was involved with, when the head of the spiritual organization heard what was going on with Black education, he said, well, we've got to get involved. And so they raised money, they built schools. Through my university years, every weekend, my father was involved in the school building project, but also they actually set up a manufacturing section to actually manufacture desks and chairs. And they had a printing press, and they expanded the printing press to print books. And they set up, actually, Mangosuthu Technical College was set up by the Divine Life Society in Durban. And my brothers mentioned that Gacha Buthelezi mentioned during the rioting, he said, we didn't even pay for those places. The government didn't even pay for those places. And now they're destroyed. Anyway, to continue. So there are wholesale programs, very limited and uneven access at local level, and partial support for cooperatives. And I could give you a whole long lecture on cooperatives, but I don't want to go into that. I've done a few studies and I set up the Cooperative Banks Development Agency. Premises, land and equipment are scarce and complex for businesses to access. Also, government still operates in silos, and there's very little cooperation across the silos. And probably one of the most severe constraints is weak educational and technical foundations. There still hasn't been a sufficient commitment towards really building strong and sound fundamentals through education. And although poverty, every policy document you look at in South Africa, poverty is mentioned everywhere. However, the approach is dispersed and unfocused. We don't have a serious poverty reduction strategy in the country. So at local government level, there is a commitment towards local economic development. That's what the revised LED framework refers to. And so the idea was to use integrated development planning to plan future development in their areas. And the motivation was to integrate racially divided business and residential areas to overcome bad planning so that poor people would not have to travel the long distances to work and endure the poor access that people had to endure towards business and other services, reduce the great differences in services between different areas, and also that informal settlements were, and spread out residential areas made economical service delivery very expensive and difficult. And to make, things more accessible, use scarce resources better to speed up delivery and to attract investment. And I might just mention at this point that in 2005, I actually wrote what was the first toolkit for local economic development. And the then Director General for the department said, oh, there's a chapter on competitive local economies. No, I don't like people to compete. We're not going to use this toolkit. She then went on to do a PhD in local economic development at the London School of Economics. So there's provision in local government legislation for participation. And the IDP refers to, have I left out a slide here? No, this is it. Yeah. That's on integrated development planning. So public participation was intended to be a part of policy, and the legislation provides for a representative forum to be established to encourage the participation of communities and other stakeholders. And it's to represent the interests of their constituencies to ensure proper communication between all stakeholders and the municipality. I see Infinix has raised their hand. Do you want to just ask a question quickly? Sorry, I don't.
No, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. I was trying to rename, then I went into the hand issue. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem at all. Okay. So the strategy is to, for the roles to be defined during the participation process to encourage participation of unorganized groups. And the method was to ensure participation during, so there was real inclusion that was envisioned in the way this was planned. And that there were timeframes for participation, inputs, comments, ways to disseminate information, and means to collect information on community needs. However, where we have found ourselves is that IDPs have not been, that there are IDPs and many of them look great. However, the implementation is where this country has really, we have wonderful sounding policy documents, and implementation is where we have really failed. This is a picture from service delivery protests in Alexandra Township, not very long ago at all, as you can see. And a researcher called Stuart Mbanyele has written this piece from which I have quoted here, and only, to a few months ago. And what he says is, the legislation and the focus is great. However, there's widespread evidence of mismanagement, poor audit outcome, massive exposure of irregular and wasteful expenditure that emerges, billions every year. And yet there are no material consequences for this poor performance. The root causes are corruption, a lack of credible accountability structures, and individual agency that is characterized by impunity. And so there's massive dysfunction as a result of political infighting, drawn out court cases, and this dissatisfaction has led to pressure to form coalitions and it has led to, that's meant to be true, instability and poor governance in local governments, to the point where in many instances the services are in a state of collapse. I was about to mention that the citizens of Grahamstown, a small town in the Eastern Cape, actually took their municipality to court, and the citizens actually won the case. However, again, it's a case of when you've got that much dysfunctionality, who takes over and how, and where do they start? And this is a very powerful piece. I would encourage you to, in fact, when we start the group discussions, I will put this reference into the chat so that you can look up this article. It's a very well written and very moving article. Please excuse me. And she's written about Pietermaritzburg. And she says, the people of this once proud city are exhausted. When grown children have to sleep in their mothers' beds, as fathers stand guard with whatever weapons they can find, you know you have breached human rights and moved into collective wrongs. I've skipped a slide here where she talks about firstly, that there was already, the city was brought to its knees by municipal neglect and the greed of those in power, and then the widespread looting and destruction could signal the death knell for Pietermaritzburg. And she ends her article by saying, this was a city of endurance, characterized by the ultra-distance marathon that started or stopped here. This refers to the Comrades Marathon that's run between Durban and Pietermaritzburg. But that emotional well of perseverance seems to have run dry as the police stations, the petrol stations in the area. So some of the options that are being discussed are, in the mid-80s, which was the time of fairly significant change in the country, there were street committees, which got people really organized. More NGO interventions, but I mentioned two that are more significant and actually seem to understand scale. SERI is the Socioeconomic Rights Institute. There are some NGOs that are talking about mobilizing social movements, some through trade unions, some through other organizations. Then some of the statements that have been made are, the malls that were destroyed, many of them are either on the edge of townships or in other central business districts. And the statement by one author, Mark Swilling, is a mall is not development. Township malls are instruments of poverty and exploitation, and that's versus local production, because one of the things that shocked me when I've gone into township malls is there's zero local business. There isn't even space for local enterprise to have markets on weekends or any of that. So should there be policy on percentages for certain goods and merchandise, malls to set aside floor space for local businesses? In Vietnam, they have a great system. They have great big corridors between shops. And those corridors are where local and rural businesses come and sell their wares on certain days of the week. Should there be restrictions on big cartels and the sizes that, and what they do? And so I think it's time for the group discussion, and the question I would request that you reflect on is, what can be the role of facilitation in supporting inclusive development? in South Africa. So thank you very much. I guess we could take a minute for questions if you have any. Otherwise, John, I guess you, does anybody want to ask a quick question, or you to keep it till after the group discussion?
Shada, I just
Yes.
want to clarify.
Sure.
When you speak about the different groups, the different stakeholders that are involved in the development program, is there already some facilitation work being done at the group level? I mean, like, at the, let's say, at the small town level or at the small business level, are the groups being mobilized at the group level, or is it something top down that government invites, or the big agents, the development agency invites stakeholders in?
Irene, one of my concerns is that facilitation is not sufficiently understood at policy level.
Okay.
Yeah. When I once did an evaluation, and when I have work, I go into townships, rural areas, and I don't get the feeling that people in government understand or use facilitation. Yeah. I've been told when I've done research that, counselors will tell people, ask for this, go for that, or rubber stamp things that should go into integrated development plans. And, pre-94, there were forums, right? And the idea, and forums were the things that became integrated development plans. However, that rapprochement across race groups, recently I'm trying to think, there's a few groups. There's this one chap called the Good Things Guy. Kubeshni, there's another chap who is it the I'm Staying group on Facebook. There's a group on Facebook called I'm Staying. And is there anything else that you're aware of that says that people are coming together across race? But my feeling is there isn't a real understanding of the depth of the issues. Kubeshni, please comment.
So let me just affirm that I share your perspective, Shata. I think that also from a government process perspective, we talk about public participation, very well captured in the Constitution, very well captured in the Municipal Systems Act, really very poorly executed, right? Also from a government perspective, we talk about various consultation mechanisms, etc., etc., etc. When it lands through government process, it does not land in a meaningful way. And I've worked in the public sector my entire existence. I do a lot of work in local government. So, what Shaja is sharing about, about the pre-94 organization of people on the ground versus where we are now is really something that's at the crux of it. We have community CBOs, community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and nonprofits who are really on their knees, and they're on their knees for a variety of systemic and non-systemic issues. These organizations held the fabric of inclusion and integration for many, many years. The one spark, Shada, that I've seen over the unrest over these last few weeks is actually the statements by some of the organizations like I forget now, but I'll misname them. But these statements around clarifying, around putting themselves forward, around mediating. So in fact, Shada, this piece that you're sharing with the group and in our space is perfectly timed, because if we are able to cohere around some of these pieces that you're sharing, The ground is there. The ground is dry, and it's waiting for the opportunity for intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Great comment. Thanks, Kubeshni. Can we go into groups now?
Sure. So I've put a question again in the chat, which is what can be the role for facilitation in supporting inclusive development. I hope I got that right, Shada.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, John.
We've got 2 groups. You'll find 4 or 5 people in each. And we're going to give you 20 minutes to just discuss, think through some of the issues that Shada raised, think about what they mean in your context as well. And then when we come back, we'll just have a few bits of feedback from the discussions. And I think Shada will come around at some point as well to pop in the groups.
Yeah, I would like to go around. Thank you, John. Yeah.
Okay, so I hope that's clear for everyone, and enjoy the discussions. Good one, Shada. Very nice. It's a lot of information. Sorry for rushing you a bit.
No, not at all.
A lot of stuff, isn't it? But
well, it is. But you also, I mean, I had to be very selective about what I said and didn't say. Also, you know, this is kind of my work, John. So.
Well, it's okay. I mean, there was a lot of learning there. You could see by some of the comments. I don't know how much you were seeing the comments in the chat, but some quite interesting comments popped up, you know.
Oh, okay.
So I think when you're sharing the screen, you don't see the comments.
Right. Yeah.
Very easily. Yeah. So do you want me to send you to one of the groups, or you can do it yourself?
No, I've got the groups open here, so I can just click on join.
Yeah. So you see, I'll stay here in the plenary because people have been dropping in and out a lot. So then I'll have to reassign people there.
Ah, right. Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So you just move around as you see fit.
Yeah. I will.
All right.
Yeah.
But there's a good mix of people, like we've said, and I think you'll find that mainly you've got people with others from different countries, you know. So.
Right.
Now I'm forgetting. I've pressed the record again. I think we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm not sure the best way of doing this, but maybe let's do a round and hear anything that came out of that for you. You know, I'm sure I popped in and out at some fascinating discussions going on, but maybe the floor is open for a few minutes. Maybe anything that you feel is worth sharing that came up in the discussion for you. Over to anybody who wants to kick off. Kubeshni.
Yeah, Kubeshni, would you like to report for us?
Okay.
I don't know if I'd be reporting. I was just aware of the things that struck me. So for me, I think my big takeaways is about how important context is. And I think both from Pat's perspective and from Shola's perspective, in terms of understanding their country specific, but also their community specific, understanding the dynamic of the power relations at play is a very, very important part of the intervention. At the end of our conversation, I was left with a question for myself and the curiosity around whether, as an intervener, I am invited, whether I volunteer, or whether I am appointed. And in these roles, there is a variable piece around how I contract around the piece of work to be done. And I don't mean contract in the way of money. I mean contract in the way of an agreement to do a piece of work. So that was the big piece that I took away from our session. Thank you very much, guys, for the valuable contributions.
Thanks, Kubeshni. Maybe let's stay with that group, some of the others in that group, if you'd like to add anything that you think the other group needs to hear about, really, from your discussion.
Well, I was left with a question after Shola's input on using, or rather making use of the different perspectives of the stakeholders, whether to come from the people or work with the developing arm or no of government, if I got that right. But yeah, it kind of, as you say, rattled my walls a little bit, because my usual stance is work with the people, because you want them to be able, you want to help them get a voice to voice their needs, and also because uh, it's my own bias. Perhaps I have a bias against uh, uh, government misuse of funds and stuff like that. So I have a deep suspicion of working with government. So that is there for me. So when Shola suggested that perhaps if you want to work on a project, you look from the view of the stakeholder that has more power, you might get more support for your efforts. Uh, I can see where she's coming from, but for me, it would need a repositioning of a few things in my own context of working with government, and a
Yeah,
re-examine of all that. So,
sure.
so
I think you're not the only
Shola,
one, eh?
yeah,
Let's hear
yeah.
from
So
Shola.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
thank you,
yeah.
Shola. But yeah, this is one of the things that I'll have to deeply question.
Yeah, yeah. I totally get what you're saying as
Yeah,
well. Although I did
yeah,
mention the third arm, so there is working from the people's side of things, there is working with the government, then there is working with the development actors,
yes,
who are a very, very strong third arm within the
yes,
Nigerian context,
yeah,
because uh, they do have a lot of influence on what the government does,
yeah,
especially in Nigeria. And there's no talking about social inclusion or development without including that third arm of things. So I think, and I agree with you that the whole point is to give the people a voice, but the approach, how you do that, especially in Nigeria, it might be more useful to work with this third arm, which is the civil society development actor space, rather than working directly from the community and becoming a threat to the government, because we have a very peculiar political administration right now that's not giving that space or that voice for a lot of confrontation or engagement. And it's now, at this time more than ever, is the time to be very creative about how you want to engage. And I think that third space provided by development actors is that opportunity that I think might be the best to explore right now, rather than directly. So that was just the perspective. That's the difference between what I was
yes.
suggesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shola. Okay, so let's move over to the other group. Elliot's already got her hand up, so let's start with her. Elliot. Elliot. Maybe you can unmute.
She might not know her hand is up.
Yeah,
She's
could
on
be.
the road. She told us she was
Oh.
on the road,
Oh,
so
she-
that might
Oh,
cause
yes.
She's on
delay.
her.
Oh,
She's
yes.
got her hand up saying, "I'm on the road. I can't talk now."
Sad, no.
She's
John,
literally on the road. No, you're in the car.
I have to show you. I have to show you that I'm on the road.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I really love the presentation. I didn't know
Okay,
that developed countries have challenges like developing countries like Uganda. But I think from the fear within the civil society when they talk about development and social inclusion, the government don't really, some extent, really understand them. They feel like if you talk about development, it should be working on the infrastructure. It should be talking about building a school. They don't want to hear about issues of mindset, issues of social inclusion in terms of sustainability, but just
Okay.
Okay, Elliot,
You're breaking up, Elliot.
Elliot, you're breaking up badly. Let's move to somebody else in your group, eh?
Irene, maybe.
Somebody else could come in from that group.
Elliot, I'm going to speak now. I'm sorry because your speech is delayed. So as Elliot was joining us on the road,
one should not come to say government should allocate money for community development. Yes. Oh, sure. Okay. No worries. Okay, go on.
Okay, Irene, please come
I'm
back in.
so sorry, Elliot. So in our group, we came up with ensuring fair representation in participation, making sure that everybody is involved in the discourse, in the development discourse. And as a facilitator, you need to find a way of getting that out. Then there's the Moro said something that was really crucial, and I will read. Facilitation is crucial in socio-economic political inclusion. There is need to the effective gathering of evidence and representation, statistics to the issue. Then one is able to use the facts and sensitize the stakeholders and facilitate the dialogue. Then he continues, he says, research, sensitization, stakeholder dialogue. Those are the most important things that, so I think evidence-based facilitation is key to inclusive development. Then we have the wearing of, making sure that one sees the issue in the different lenses of the participants who are there. Be informed about what is going on, about the policy, about what is going on in a country, what is going on that topic that you're going to facilitate, and also the politics that are involved in that. Then we had one that there is need to adjust the facilitation styles or techniques to respond to the category of people that we engage with, so that we do not go, those who know Kenya, you don't go to speak to people who are out there who migrate every day with a PowerPoint. You need to find a way of facilitating to them. So that are some of the things that we talked about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Irene. Anybody else from that group would like to add anything else? And I'm
putting the chat, what we discussed in the chat. So
that would be great. Yeah, especially
okay.
that statement that you shared from Moro.
Okay.
Paul, you want to come in?
Yes. If we,
wow.
Do I have time to say something?
Of course, yeah. Of course you do. Please go ahead.
I shared with others about the program which we can help as a facilitator to help those people who have no voice to speak. We can speak on their behalf. For instance, the minority group in the country where there are white privilege, sometimes they don't see issue. But if you are able to see it, you can participate in public, like City Hall, make that voice be heard by the chief of City Hall or in public discussion. Because those people like minority group, a poor group, or the minority group, it means in the where there are, for instance, where there are majority. The majority, they have public services, they have everything, the privilege, but others, they don't have it. But for me, I told you that I'm in US, but sometimes I participate in a group for people of color. People of color mean Asian or Spanish or other indigenous people. It means they don't know the benefit. They don't know how they can develop by themselves. Some of them, it's not mean all of them. For instance, I said, where they are immigrant, where they live, some of facility like the road, access of the road are not cleaned in winter time. The road are not well maintained, because the issue they say, okay, those people maybe they don't have, they don't have voice in the public. If I go in Africa, as you said, the South Africa, the countryside, they don't have the privilege for school. For instance, the countryside, some of the women, they drop school. They don't know the adult education can be the one thing can help them to achieve their school. They can be writing and reading for adult education in the countryside. That time they can help the children to study as well. That voice, if you don't help them to do it, nobody gonna say it. Maybe they're afraid to speak up in public services. In one word, this meeting is very important. As a facilitator, we need to speak up on behalf of the voice who have no chance to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. I think what I'd like to suggest is we've not heard from Monica, and I felt you were about to come in there, and we've not heard from Moro. So maybe I'd like to give the space to the two of you just to add anything else. And welcome to Nena. You come in just as we're about to finish, but you'll catch the last couple of minutes.
I'm sorry, it's been raining. Network has been poor.
Oh, okay. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. Monica?
Thank you, John. I would just like to share a little story in about 3 minutes. At one point in time, I worked in Namibia, that is a neighbor to South Africa. And we had an issue with one of the communities where they lacked water. If you know Namibia, it's a semi-desert, basically. So the community lacked water, and this is a community that was near a school. And in times, in the summer, even the school would lack water. So we engaged with Ministry of Health, especially, and Ministry of Social Welfare, to just come and listen to the people, the plight of the people. And instead, as we organized the meeting, instead of from the community, he instead called up, sons of the community who have been educated and live in the nearby towns and cities to please come home, because we are going to discuss very important issues, and you're the ones who know the English, you're the ones that are knowledgeable, and you can speak on behalf of the community. Yes. So when we got wind of that, we had to take 2 days to explain to the chief how the ordinary community are going to actually bring out their own issues using participatory tools. He was very skeptical about it. He's like, but they don't know how to read and write. We had to explain to him how we will do it. And he couldn't wait to see how it would all play out. So on the day of the meeting, we had very nice games. We had all the Play-Doh and very practical things that they could use to show, for example, a distance that a child would walk to first go to collect water in a nearby stream, which is about 3 kilometers away, before they could return and then walk to school about 4 kilometers away. So when we did all that, for me, I felt that the community was actually engaged we spotted that as a gap in inclusive development, whereby the people, the chief did not have, he didn't have the confidence in how the people would actually bring their issues out. But with participation, with in very innovative ways, they were able to do that. And the message came out very clearly. And I think they drilled them about 7 boreholes in that community, because it was very vast, and there were a lot of people living there. Yeah.
Thank you. What a lovely example, Monica. Thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, so I promised Moro, if Moro you'd like to share anything, and then we're going to wrap up from there. But it's a sign of a good meeting, isn't it, when nobody wants to end? So that's great. Over to you, Moro.
Okay, thank you. I think my contribution has been echoed by my colleague earlier, and I think facilitation is so crucial to bringing about social and economic development. And as mentioned earlier, as practitioners, we need very good evidence through a robust process of research and coming out with hard facts that speaks to the issues that will bring about inclusion. And there is the need to also go through a systematic process that empowers the people to drive home their demands that includes them in the system, whether economically, socially, or politically. And as mentioned earlier, these steps are the research stage, a sensitization process, stakeholder engagement, a dialogue, and then facilitating these processes with the people in leadership. And as you go across the stages in facilitating inclusion, you build the capacity of the people to get to enhance their voices, to drive, to push for policies to change that would, at the end of the day, bring about the development and inclusion that they seek. So this has been my contribution, which I am re-echoing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moro. It's great to hear so many people very passionate about inclusion and facilitation, and how there are things that we can do, which is wonderful. Just before I hand over to Shada for the last couple of words, I just wanted to make people aware of the upcoming meetings for this special interest group of social inclusion facilitators. We're going to be doing a session about the OLMA framework, which is a framework that's been used in South Africa particularly, but elsewhere as well, looking at promoting inclusion and tackling racism and sexism. Basil Manning will lead that, and Shada will also be part of that. We've got one called Destiny Ethiopia from Negusu Aklilu, it's from Ethiopia. Shalaka Gundi from India is going to do one looking at facilitation on a global level. How do you work with people from many different countries at the same time? And Rangbhumi Theatre coming back to help us to look at how to use theatre techniques in facilitation. Now, the dates are as fixed, but we haven't fixed the topics to the dates yet, so bear with us. But basically, this group meets around this time on the second Wednesday of every month. So those are the dates for the remaining months of the year. Okay, so just so you know. There's Shada's email if you want to follow up with her in particular. If you want to know more about this social inclusion group, there's an email address, or you could contact some of us who are here, like myself and Shada, Monica, Irene, Pat, all very active members. And if you don't know much about IAF, please have a look at the website and think about joining. Okay. All right. So I'll hand over to Shada, who's going to close everything up for us. And Mariam, welcome. Although you've come in at the end as well, but good that you're there.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Well, I think I'll share my slides with you, John, so that, and if Mariam wants it, there was a spelling error there that I will correct. And yeah, I want to thank everybody who's been here. I was particularly struck by the perspectives that came up in the group discussion, and I really appreciated that. I also appreciated the extent of complexity that we have to bear in mind when we are facilitating in the social inclusion context. So there was so many valuable contributions to the discussion, and I really appreciated it. And, you know, once again, it doesn't matter even if you're the presenter in a context, there's still an opportunity to learn so much. And before we part, I want to share with you that I have this bottle of beans that I have referred to this as the most well-traveled beans in Africa, because these are rating tools that I use in participation, whether it's around financial inclusion or what's happening with a program that people are involved with. And, you know, as a facilitation tool, they are incredibly useful. And, you know, it's one of the ways in which to get people to understand each other in the facilitation context. And yeah, I agree with the comment that was made in the chat that it's very difficult to think about or to work on social inclusion without really effective facilitation tools. So keep up the good work, everybody. Let's keep searching for tools that work and ways to actually promote economic and social inclusion. Thank you all so very much for being here today.
Shada, thanks for leading us so wonderfully. Really appreciate it. Maybe we should all turn on our cameras and give each other a wave and say thanks. You know, I like to do this to hear some different languages. Let's say thank you and goodbye, or whatever you want to say in whichever language you choose. Okay, yeah. So I'll count it down from 3, 2, 1. Siabonga kakulu.
Boa noite, boa noite.
Boa noite.
Lama noi.
Lama noi noi.
Una mela o bye bye no.
Murakoze, murakoze.
Murakoze chan,
Don't why interested in Kinyarwanda.
Moro merasi papa.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you,
bye,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.